stove help stop disease? Can it help the environment? Can it even save lives? Well, we're going to find out with Peter Scott from Burn Design. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Stan. Great to be here.
All right, so I've said all those things. You're actually in the health prevention business. Is that what you are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, correct. Yeah. I mean, mostly I'm interested in reducing deforestation globally, but of course I'm also interested in reducing advanced respiratory illness, and millions of people die each year from being exposed to smoke from traditional cook stoves and three-stone fires. So it's a big challenge, and many people aren't aware at all about the impacts of three-stone fires in terms of global health.
Well, let's talk exactly about that, because what you do at Burn Design is that you design stoves primarily geared towards the developing world, which we on Rainmakers and at Public Exposure call impact countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, I've spent the last 15 years of my life designing different technologies. So we go in there and we'll set up a market-based solution to and design a stove that people want to buy. So, for example, in Kenya right now, women spend about $500 a year on charcoal. So, you can imagine for a woman in a slum, that's maybe 30% of her income. So, we'll design a stove that will only use half as much fuel, which saves her $250 each year, and then she can use that for buying clothes, starting a small business, buying food. I mean, anything you could imagine somebody in the developing world would want to do with an extra $250 in their pocket. So for us, it's really a market-based solution, and it's about scale. There's 3 billion people right now that rely on biomass, that's wood, charcoal, and dung, for cooking each day. And
3 billion people?
3 billion people, yeah.
Wow, that's half the planet.
That's about half the planet, absolutely. And crazy enough, in sub-Saharan Africa, the number is growing. So by 2030, there'll be about 1 billion people just in sub-Saharan Africa that will be using biomass. And it's like if you ever went into a hut, say in Kenya or Sudan or anywhere, you'd go in and you'd see this incredible plume of smoke, which is the equivalent of about 4,000 cigarettes an hour. So you hear about secondhand smoke. Well, people are being exposed to that every day when they're cooking in huts, and that could be in the highlands of Guatemala, it could be in Bangladesh, it could be in sub-Saharan Africa. So yeah, there's a great opportunity to help make a difference for people.
So they actually take their stoves and then they put them inside of their own huts, and then the smoke goes out?
Yeah, so my team of engineers, designers, researchers, we spend thousands and thousands of hours putting together a stove design that will make 60 to 90% less smoke. And so the woman will go to town and she'll buy our stove, and then she'll use that to replace her three-stone fire or her traditional charcoal stove. So yeah, so the idea is that they'll stop using the traditional system and only use our new improved system.
All right, describe your system if you would.
Well, I mean, our approach at Burn Design and Burn Manufacturing is to really look at what the fuel they have, and then also to look at what the cooking task is. So we can really design any stove for any particular application. So in East Africa, people are making corn porridge, and they're using charcoal. So we say, what's the best way to design a stove to reduce smoke and increase performance? So we'll use sort of first principles of heat transfer and combustion to design that stove. So there isn't sort of one stove that we have. It's more applying principles and then working really closely with local women to make a stove that they want to use. Obviously there's no point in sitting in the lab for years and designing this thing that nobody wants to use. So the actual stove, it's a certain geometry, it's super insulated. I wish I had a sample here to show you, because it's hard to sort of talk about this. The other stove we're designing with the world's largest cement manufacturer, Cemex, Cementos de Mexico. So we're designing a new stove for them that will reduce fuel consumption by 70% for women in the highlands of Guatemala. So, that's just an example. Then we've designed the world's largest institutional stove. It's 500 liters or a couple hundred gallons that people are using to protect orangutan habitat in Borneo. So there's a million different applications of what we're doing.
Peter, this is fascinating. How did you get started in all of this?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'm not an engineer or a designer by trade, only by practice. So 23 years ago, I went to Africa, saw deforestation, got down on my knees and wept and said, I'm going to devote my life to saving the forests of Africa. And then from there, so lots of twists and turns in my life. I did a male initiation climbed up onto a rock and a bolt of lightning came out of the sky and said, you're going to design stoves to save the planet. So, you know, I've always been interested in trying to do positive environmental work. And, you know, I'm not sure if, you know, I think people are sort of aware, but like, it's not business as usual on the planet anymore. You know, I mean, the planet is under grave threat, and we can't really act like, oh, we're going to, you know, just go to work and think things are going to work out. So we, you know, it's going to take an army of people. And, you know, we were saying just before the show, people are waking up to that. You know, we were talking about the dean of the engineering school, and he said, you know, 10 years ago, all people wanted to do was just, you know, start a startup, make $1 million and retire. And now he's saying all of his students that are graduating all want to change the world. But the question is, what's a good vehicle for them to do that? You know, a lot of people end up in the army or something, God forbid. Well, I mean, for me personally, I think that isn't really the best way to change the world. I think the best way to change the world is doing something like reducing deforestation, for example. So, you know, we want to give people a platform where they can really do good and not just sort of humor themselves with some small project, but really to make a difference.
But if a woman, because we have talked about this, and we've done interview after interview after interview, and it is always the woman that is doing the hard work to get fuel. But if she's out picking up sticks and finding charcoal and doing everything that she can day after day after day, you're coming in, and are you changing her way of life?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, I mean, right.
And is she receptive to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people, you know, if you look in the developing world right now, the explosion of cell phones, for example, you know, people are more than happy to take a technology if it makes a difference for them. So, you know, that's why it's so important for us to work with local women to actually design the stove, say, how tall should it be? What shape should it be? Tell us about your day-to-day life. And so, you know, for example, in Uganda, where the 3-stone fire normally is, the mother-in-law will build the 3-stone fire and put like a sacred amulet underneath that 3-stone fire, so that if we come in with a technology that doesn't take that into account, then people won't use the stove. So that's just an example. We have to be cognizant of people's cultural practices. So that's very important. And then just, you know, you might find out like if we make a stove and it's orange, they say, ah, we hate the stove. I said, why? Because it's orange. Well, what if I make it black? Then it's a good stove. So, you know, that's interesting is that, you know, orange, for example, is maybe part of a political party that people don't support, and so they don't want an orange stove. Or a red stove is seen as being someone who's proud or arrogant is color red. So it's just those small little things. You have to get those things dialed and answered to design for them. So in terms of changing their life, yeah, women go out and can spend many hours and walk many miles each day to go get firewood. And then let's say then they go to a forest reserve that's protected. They'll get caught by the local police, and they'll say, well, either you pay a fine or we'll rape you. And they say, well, we don't have any money. So they say, okay, this is a very sort of business-like transaction. You're now going to be raped. So literally, the price of fuel wood is rape in places like Congo and Uganda. So putting in a fuel-efficient stove means women are spending less time out in these protected forest areas. They're cutting down less trees and also reducing their incidence of rape. So yeah, again, people would never even think about that. That's what's sort of exciting about the cook stove space, is that it's a nexus or a matrix or a meeting point for so many different things. Like if you're interested in greenhouse gases, you know, 18% of greenhouse gases can be attributed to deforestation and degradation connected to cook stoves. 18%, it's incredible. Wow. Or if you're interested in reducing rape, you're interested in reducing indoor air pollution. 4 million people die each year. Well, so yeah, so it's a great opportunity for changing women's lives for the better.
Are you dealing with some of the governments of some of the countries that you mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I just went to a conference in Kenya, and I met with someone from the Prime Minister's office, and they were jumping up and down saying, please come and build a factory for us in Kenya to introduce modern manufacturing in the cook stove space. So we have a lot of enthusiasm and excitement coming from the government sector for our particular project. You know, they're working on a briquette project right now, made from bamboo. And then interestingly enough, they approached me because I also design fuel-efficient tobacco curing systems, because tobacco is devastating tropical forests throughout the developing world. So I developed a system. So we're going to partner with the government to build more of my tobacco curing systems, as well as building a factory to make our stuff.
But as you change women's lives, you're also changing men's lives, but you're also changing the lives of that government agent who wants either to receive a fee or to be able to rape the woman.
Yeah.
I suspect that doesn't make you very popular with some people.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting point, Stan. I mean, so for example, I've designed these big stoves, which you call institutional stoves, or maybe a couple hundred gallons, and that the schools that buy them sometimes don't want to buy them because the person who buys the fuel wood also gets a kickback. So the more fuel wood they buy, the more kickback they get. So they're, again, you have to think about that. Like, how do you work with the people that are benefiting from charcoal production or benefiting from more trees being cut down? An interesting fact is, like, right now the charcoal industry in sub-Saharan Africa is something like $8 billion, which is massive. Again, you think people in Africa don't have any money. They're spending a lot of money on charcoal, and that creates jobs. And so we have to think about how do we work with those charcoal producers to give them jobs so that we're not in conflict with local people. So that's also, a challenge. But I think we don't want to say, well, these people have jobs destroying their environment. Let's not mess with that. We have to, give people meaningful work and also save the planet.
But that's been what's happening, though, for years here in the United States as well. The people have jobs destroying the planet.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's total madness. No jobs on a dead planet. Yeah, absolutely. So it's ridiculous. What if someone had a job, chopping up babies or something like that, or at a stove that ran on dead babies? Well, you see, can't mess with jobs. So it's really, you have to. The whole jobs environment debate is sort of a moot.
Let's talk about GE.
Yeah, please.
You are in partnership with GE, and which is, it seems to me that's a fantastic partnership that you have going. And where are you going to work? How does the partnership work?
Yeah.
Who all's involved?
So I went to a conference a few years ago, and General Electric approached me and said they were interested in our project. GE is interested in Africa, and they see it as a big sort of growth opportunity. And they also have a couple of big arms like Eco Imagination, Healthy Imagination, where they want to partner with folks that are doing things similar to us, which really, stoves saving forests and reducing indoor air pollution lines up with them. So yeah, they've been a key partner for us. And then so we're also working with US Gov, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, to work with, so it's a partnership between GE and OPIC to do the core funding that will allow us to build the factory. So it's $1 million from GE and $3 million from OPIC. And then we also got some money from the UN, from State Department, from the Washington Global Health Foundation here locally in Washington State. So yeah, but with with GE, we could imagine partnering with them throughout Africa and the developing world to manufacture stoves.
One thing that I've noticed about people in impact countries is that they have a tremendous amount of ingenuity, and they will work with solutions. But if you bring things from the top down, that's more difficult for them, and perhaps is a shock to the system. How can you prevent shock to the system?
Well, again, it's about working with people from day one. So, I talked about a little bit about our system, which is take the fuel and take the cooking task, and then it's not spending years in the lab before we bring a product to people. So it's really, market driven as opposed to product driven. So that's, I think a lot of people pay lip service to that. Like, we asked them what color they wanted before we made the final design. But it's really, I have full-time people on the ground in Kenya working with them. So yeah, I mean, just the top-down approach doesn't work. I mean, there's thousands of stories about aid projects going awry. Where someone shows up and they're going to drill. For example, Bangladesh, they drilled all these wells. That's great. Of course, the water was filled with arsenic, and then suddenly people are dying from that. So it really takes enormous on-the-ground time to not screw up. Because everyone thinks they're doing it differently now. It's like, oh, we made mistakes in the past, but now we're going to do it right. And the reality is people are still doing development really backwards. So
let's talk about some of the people that you know in Kenya and Uganda and some of the other countries that you've mentioned where you're actually working now. How that they have used the factory in a box, or how that they have, it starts from beginning to where you believe you've got a finished project.
Well, I spent I just created my lab 2 years ago. So for 15 years, I was a consultant, independent consultant, and then I came to Vashon Island in Washington State and said, okay, I'm going to create a lab and put together my stove army of people. So that was 2 years ago. So since then, I've put my team together, designed a couple of critical stoves, and then also put the financing together. So in a way, we're just getting started with my vision of making a modern manufacturing, which will then make millions of stoves. So we just ordered our first kits from China, which will then be locally assembled in Kenya. So we're just getting started with this new model. Before that, I had a different model where I'd work with local artisans and try to support them to set up smaller scale production. So for example, in Malawi, we set up a small factory that sold millions of dollars of institutional stoves. So that was a great project because really it was just, we met a local metal worker. He had a lot of entrepreneurial drive, and we were able to work with him to design a very simple yet elegant stove that was able to save 90% of the fuel that these people would normally be burning. So, but that's sort of our old model. Our new model is raise the capital, do modern manufacturing so we can really reach scale. So yeah, I'd like to be able to say that, we've already, disseminated lots of our factory in the boxes, but it's really, we're just getting started with that new model.
What kind of reception are you getting from, we talked a little bit about this, but not just the women and not just the men, but what kind of reception do you get from those who are decision makers inside the impact country and those who are decision makers here in the United States?
It's a great question, Stan. Well, Hillary Clinton has been a huge advocate for clean cook stoves. So, the interesting explosion of interest in cook stoves really happened from a New Yorker article, if you can believe it, in 2009. So from that, people really became aware of the cook stove space, and people like Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton said, US Gov needs to get involved with this, and they created the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, and they mandated, $50 million or $124 million, I think it is now, to support clean cook stove dissemination. So that's, now that the UN is really behind it, it's made a huge difference. People are saying, let's put millions of dollars in the space. It's kind of interesting if you think about it. Malaria kills, half the number of people that indoor air pollution from cook stoves causes, and yet there's tens and tens of hundreds of millions of dollars into malaria research or preventing malaria, but almost no money. We're spending money, trying to find life on other planets, but we're not doing anything to protect, life right now we're not doing enough to protect life on this planet right now. If you go to Congo right now, you'll see, people are risking their lives to save forests to stop charcoal producers. If you go to Kinshasa, the capital, 10 million people in Congo, they're all using charcoal. And that charcoal is decimating forests. So, thank God people are finally just waking up to that now.
How does it decimate forests?
Well, to make a ton of charcoal, it takes about 10 tons of trees. So people chop down a forest, bury it in the ground, light it on fire, burn off the volatiles, and then you're left with char. It's then shipped to cities where people then burn it. So, in, say, Congo right now, in protected areas around Virunga, where gorilla habitat is, people are training park rangers to protect that forest. But then the military, or the Congolese military, are the ones making charcoal. So you end up having these very strange situations where you're having gun battles between park rangers from the Congolese government and the military fighting over, these forest resources. So, maybe 30 park rangers have died in the last 5 years, something like that. And then, but yeah, in terms of, the forests all across sub-Saharan Africa are being wiped out from charcoal production. So we've got to get, alternatives to charcoal and super fuel efficient charcoal.
When you talk to representatives of the government of the Congo, for example, and you say, we're going to bring in these cook stoves, and others have paved the way for you as well, I'm sure. What is their reaction? Do they say, yes, come in because we want you to save our forest?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think it's interesting, 5 years ago, if you had talked to, say, the Minister of Energy for Malawi or Uganda, they didn't even talk about biomass or, or wood or charcoal, even though 90% of energy comes from biomass in sub-Saharan Africa. But to them, it was an archaic fuel, and the future was going to be electricity or gas or nuclear, I don't know, whatever it is. So it was off their radar, but now they're waking up to the fact that people aren't just going to climb up this energy ladder, that people are going to rely on biomass and we need to use it more efficiently. So there has been sort of a sea change that's saying, let's wake up, let's really address that, because by not addressing it, the forests are just vanishing. If you go to Tanzania now, people are actually importing charcoal from Zambia because they've decimated the forests in Tanzania. If you go to, Ethiopia has 3% of their intact forests, and people are still using charcoal. If you go to Somalia right now, which people think of being very desertified, they're exporting charcoal to Saudi Arabia for use. You know,
Really?
like Madagascar, you know, I mean, this like, what, 10% of the world's biodiversity? Massive deforestation because of charcoal, local market for cooking rice 3 times a day. Yeah. So again, it's just off people's radar. And also like tobacco production. People are they just don't know about it. And now people are waking up to it, and they can come and join Burn Design, devote their lives to making better stoves, using different and better fuels to save this. So I think that's why we have this groundswell of support, because they recognize this is a viable way forward.
So there are people who are watching who no doubt will, and by the way, you can go to the website that we will put it up on the screen, and have put it up on the screen several times. But I'm interested in the government.
Can I make one comment about our website? You know, we're engineers and geeks. We're terrible with our website, so you probably just put up my email address. Because then people can contact me directly.
All right, we'll put that up too.
Okay, sure.
But I'm interested in the governments.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm not trying to avoid the government question. But
no, and the reason being is that I guess it really comes down to, do they care?
Well, I think absolutely, they're waking up to it. You know, for example, charcoal production was just banned. They just said it was illegal, but then it just created a black market.
Well, so, you know, if Somalia is exporting charcoal to Saudi Arabia, I mean, Saudi Arabia's got a lot of money.
Right.
I don't understand why they wouldn't use oil in their stoves, but you know, hey.
I don't know enough about that. I just met somebody from Somalia recently that told me about that. But you know, Somalia doesn't really have a government. I mean, it's a government it's a nation with a state. So there's no controls over that. So, and then many.
And you're working in Somalia?
Right now we're not. Although people have approached us and said, let's set up a factory. You know, we'd like to be everywhere in sub-Saharan Africa eventually. Yeah. But the governments, I think, are waking up to, they can't just ban charcoal. They need to regulate it so they can control it. So I think yes, they are. They're waking up to it, and there's a sea change, but it's still slow.
How do you determine what countries to go into? I mean, if somebody calls you from Mozambique, do you say, hey, I'll be there tomorrow?
I do, and the rest of my team threatens to fire me as CEO because, you know, I want to be everywhere tomorrow, but it takes time to build our team up. But I think Congo is definitely one of our key steps, Mozambique, Madagascar. You know, for me, it's about saving forests and saving biodiversity. So I want to be in those zones as soon as possible.
How do you define success then?
Well, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. So I started in Central America, and one of the stoves that I designed, that stove has then gone all across Central America, and they've built more than 100,000 of those. So you know, people have told me that in their communities, almost everyone is using that particular stove. Indoor air pollution has been reduced, and they're actually seeing less deforestation in the hills around. The places where we've installed stove projects. So we work a lot with carbon asset developers. So, you know, stoves can, you know, our stove can reduce 3 tons of CO emissions per year. So because of that, we can get carbon credits that can then support the project. So to do that, we have to do a lot of monitoring. We have to find out, are people actually using the stove? Is it reducing deforestation in the area? So that actually is happening. But, you know, to be honest, you know, even though I've probably done 500,000 stoves in my life, it's just a drop in a bucket. You can think 3 billion people are using it. We need to make 100 million stoves by 2020, according to Hillary Clinton, and we're not reaching that goal. So I need to expand faster and faster. But success is really that forests are saved and people are breathing cleaner air.
Are you able to build the stoves to create employment in these impact countries?
Yeah, you know, our goal with this new factory we're building in Kenya will be about 200 employees, and these will be sort of skilled and non-skilled workers, which is great because, you know, we don't want to just create jobs where people are hammering on a, you know, metal can in the slums, but real development, like in a modern manufacturing facility like ours. And then here in the U.S., we'll have a design lab that will employ, you know, 20 or 30 people. So it's a great sort of synergy. You know, U.S. has this great design entrepreneurial skill. We can raise capital and then do local manufacturing in these countries and create jobs. So again, it's, you know, a win-win.
One question I got to ask, is it Gkopua?
Oh yeah, the Gkopua.
Yeah, what is that?
So the Gkopua means like poa is like a hip word for saying like cool. If you go to Kenya, somebody will be like, hey, mambo, and you'd say poa. So poa just means cool. So it's a cool stove, which is kind of ironic because it's obviously want it to be a hot stove, but it's cool. So Gkopua, I designed the stove and we set up sort of intermediate scale manufacturing. So you know, they've made, I think, 20 or 30,000 of those stoves in a small factory in Nairobi, and that stove's been really successful in reducing indoor air pollution and deforestation. So, but you know, by doing that project, I realized the limitation of it. And I said, look, I need to raise $5 million and build a real factory.
In the 2.5 minutes that we have left, I wanted to ask you this. All right, so let's go straight to Kenya. Let's go to a woman who is using charcoal inside her hut right now, and she says, "Hey, I've heard about the Gkopua, and I want one of those." First off, how much do they cost? And secondly, what is she going to get?
Okay, so the Gkopua, she'd spend about $25 for that. And so that's a wood stove, so she'd be using that rurally. So, you know, oftentimes what happens is people would buy it in the city for her, like for their nanny, their granny, and they would bring it to her, and then she would use it. So she would get a fuel-efficient wood stove that's ceramic and metal, and she can cook her meals on it. And then our new stove, which is charcoal, that's urban, and so people could go to like the local Walmart, buy our stove for $35, and then they can use it. And so, you know, payback period is about 45 days. So, you know, there's a big incentive for him or her to go out and buy that stove and use it. So, yeah, and it's, you know, the great thing about this is that, you know, Africa has often got junk. You know, it's like the worst of the worst gets sent to Africa. Like if you go to the shop and buy a flashlight, it dies in a day. So if you go and you support or help local women or local farmers, it's maybe one of the best things you can do, because no one has ever come to a woman and ever since someone invented the three-stone fire 500,000 years ago, no one's come to her and say, here's this beautiful piece of technology, use this and it will change your life. So, you know, you'll get, if you work on this, you get people saying enough blessings on you to get you to heaven. If that's where you want to go.
Well, for those who are watching, how can they help?
Yeah, well, I mean, people can invest. We have it's a for-profit, but it's a social venture where we raise money to build the factory, and so people can invest in that. So we're talking with a number of impact investors. And then people can also donate to our nonprofit. If people have a design or engineering or research background, they can come and join our team. And, you know, we've got people who, you know, quit their job at Weyerhaeuser after 30 years and come and work for us for, you know, not quite market rates. We've got people who come from Vietnam and spend a year in our lab working on designing stoves. We've got students from engineering schools. So really just email me, come, we'll find housing for you, we'll probably even feed you, and you can devote your life to saving the world. So yeah, so that's lots of different options about how they can help.
Well, that's the great way to end the show. Peter Scott, thank you very much for being with us. Check it out. We will put the website up. I know it'll probably change, but also there's the email address too. So, Peter, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.